thank you very much for coming here. I acknowledge that there are a lot of really cool talks happening at the same time, so I'm very grateful that you chose to come listen to me talk about a passion of mine. So I'll be talking about embracing neurodiversity in the tech industry in particular. So a little about me. My name is Monique Springer. I am a software engineer. I was working at Singular Systems up until a week ago. I'm currently 7 months pregnant, and I'm doing my best to get as much of my studies in before baby comes. I'm a bit of a hobby collector. I do yoga, painting, drawing, knitting, crocheting, reading, video games. Just a disclaimer, I wasn't pregnant when I signed up to do this. And it should be known that the brain fog that comes with pregnancy is a very real thing. So if I forget what I'm talking about mid-sentence, please bear with me. So when I talk about neurodiversity, I acknowledge that as a lot, it may have come across on your online. The term neurodiversity may have come across your online bubble, whatever that may be. But some of you may have not even heard of the term, or you may have heard of it, but you're not aware of the full gravity of the term. So just to talk about what it is an umbrella term for a set of conditions or diagnostic labels, which refer to individuals who cognitively process the world a little bit differently than what is considered the norm. There is as well a social facet to the term neurodiversity, which implies that it is as the result of a normal, natural variation in the human genome, and it also implies that people with these conditions do not necessarily require, they don't need to be cured, but instead require help and accommodation. So some terminology, just for the sake, because I'll be using these terms quite a lot throughout the presentation. So neurodivergent is an adjective, so it describes a neurodivergent person. Neurodiversity is a property of a group, so neurodiversity as a whole refers to the whole concept and the movement. And then neurotypical is also an adjective which describes a person who is not neurodivergent. There is, of course, the argument that there is no such thing as a typical brain, but this is just for the sake of our own frame of reference. It's just semantics. So when I say it's a set of conditions or diagnostic labels, these are, and this is a non-exhaustive list of some of the conditions that fall under this umbrella. And if you look at all of them, if you don't have one or more than one of these conditions yourself, you probably know somebody who does. And as such, people with these conditions make up a large proportion of the population, and as a result, a large proportion of the workforce. Some of them are, some people with these conditions are more able to work than others. So, and also every person has their own individual lived experience, and there's no such thing as a typical autistic person or a typical ADHD person. So you may ask, Monique, why are you qualified to talk about this? I don't have any formal qualifications in this field, but I'm autistic and I also have ADHD. So I can talk from my own lived experience and do my best to extrapolate from that. And also the really intense deep dive I did on the internet researching for this talk. So the main purpose of what I want to go through with this talk is to help all of us achieve some sense of empathy for the people with these conditions who inevitably are around us. So the first thing that we will talk about is understanding some of the common challenges that people with these conditions face. You may have seen these the condition iceberg infographics on the internet. As you can see, there's a lot of them. So I'm not going to be going into all of them, but if you haven't seen these before, what it's basically saying is at the top of the iceberg is what it looks like the condition is, but then below the line, it's what actually goes on behind the scenes. So I've done my best to give a summarized view of some common challenges that people across the board may experience. Common challenges include executive functioning, sensory processing, expressive language, nonverbal communication, social camouflaging. So I'll be going into all of these in detail. Executive functioning, I like to think of, it took me quite a while to actually understand what this is, but think of executive functioning as the part of your brain that acts as your brain's project manager. So it's the part of your brain that's responsible for delegating your brain's resources and energy to various tasks. So what that looks like in a person who has strong executive functioning would be that they're able to adequately allocate their resources in their head. So they're able to multitask, they're able to organize, they're able to plan and prioritize, they're able to focus on tasks. However, there are a lot of neurodivergent people whose executive functioning part of the brain is somewhat impaired. And what this can show up as is difficulty focusing, having difficulty with following directions, and difficulties with time management and planning and prioritizing. We then have sensory processing. When we think of sensory processing, it's literally like our 5 or however many senses we have, how our brain perceives the world around us and how it interprets those signals. So for a person with a normal sensory profile, you're generally able to adapt to your surroundings without much difficulty. However, for a lot of neurodivergent people, you can think of it as like a coffee filter, where for some neurodivergent people, the coffee filter may have too few holes, and so nothing gets through. Or it may have too many holes, and then everything comes through all at once. And we can refer to that as sensory sensitivities. And what that looks like is that for the same sensory input, the brain essentially magnifies what's going on around it, and this can lead to being mentally overloaded easily. Then we have expressive language, which is basically just the ability to communicate and talk with others. So thinking on your feet, being able to process questions, or even being able to speak at all. A lot of neurodivergent people may avoid talking or altogether, we call that selective mutism or mutism. It also may show up in atypical social behaviors, which can look like, a most common example, in my opinion, is a lack of eye contact. The problem with not understanding that these come from an impaired sense of expressive language is that these symptoms may be incorrectly interpreted by people who don't necessarily understand them, such as a lack of eye contact, which may come across as rude or uninterested. Then we have nonverbal communication, which is an important part of communication. We all learn about it and how it's an important way to communicate and receive a message. But a lot of neurodivergent people may miss subtler forms of communication, may not pick up as intuitively on nonverbal cues. And on the flip side, they may not communicate using the same nonverbal cues that other people do. But just because the communication looks a bit differently, it doesn't make it any less valuable. Then we have social camouflage or masking, which is literally just the behavior of trying to act normal or hide one's neurodivergent traits. It is a very active process. It's where one literally comes up using one's pattern seeking and intellectual abilities, you mimic what you see in other people, so as to compensate for the shortfalls where communication styles don't come intuitively. So what this can look like is literally practicing social scripts, what to say and when, mirroring facial expressions, monitoring your levels of eye contact or your tone of voice, or actively suppressing your symptoms. Yeah, and on masking, because it's such an active process, you're actively thinking about it. It does take up a lot of mental energy, especially in like a workplace where you're having to do it the whole day. Not everyone does this. With all of these challenges that I've presented, not every neurodivergent person does them, but I did my best in trying to touch as many of the conditions as possible. So the main goal of today is being able to empathize with the people around you, because as we know, with one's brain being built differently, there's the challenges that I've spoken about. But also, with your brain being built differently, it means that there are actually some, not benefits, but like there may be some strategic advantages which may work in your favor as a result of your brain being built differently. Now, in the tech industry, we find that some of the more important pillars in the tech industry would be creativity, problem solving, and innovation. And if you have a population whose brains are literally made differently than what's not considered normal, what better way to bolster an organization's innovation, creativity, problem solving than having people who literally don't think the same way? This, like I say here, it offsets tendencies to think in the same direction. People who literally will approach problems completely differently. And here's some specific examples of some strengths that come with different conditions. Now, I have a friend who's dyslexic, not the most relevant to tech, but she, her 3D thinking abilities are phenomenal to me. So you know the age-old problem of when you're moving house and you're trying to fit a couch through a door. And she's able to like just look at the door frame and the shape of the couch, and she'll be able to tell you, like, without even picking up the couch, whether that couch will fit and at what angle you must put it in and how high. And I know I can't do that. And I just think it's amazing. That's just how her brain is built. Now, when it comes to this discussion on neurodiversity, it has become a little bit of a buzzword depending on what bubble of the internet you're on. But I don't know about you, but I've seen hundreds of articles about how we need to, like, there's this superpower of neurodiversity, and like how all you need to do is just give the person the right working conditions, and then they're going to become your local math savant, essentially, which is, I don't necessarily agree with that. While there are a lot of strengths that I've mentioned now, I think having that approach takes away from the lived experience of people with these conditions, where in my own experience, I've been applauded in a work sense on my pattern seeking and problem solving abilities. But the only superpower that I think I have is my ability to mask for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, which means that I would be burning out like every 3 months. And I've been in hospital a couple of times because of that. And so what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily just a superpower waiting to be unlocked by an employer. I don't just give them the right snacks and the right lighting and then wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. So why we talk about neurodiversity is because the tech industry is considered an attractive industry for a lot of neurodivergent workers, because it does tap into those things of problem solving and innovation and creativity. But we need to approach it from a moral standpoint instead of looking to achieve competitive advantage. So just some examples on a very high level of, so these are some big guys who have acknowledged the importance of including neurodivergent people in their D&I strategies. I know that Salesforce and Microsoft, they've specifically gone and adjusted their recruitment process to make it more accessible to neurodivergent people. And then I'm not going to go into detail on this, but it's quite a cool thing if you want to look it up. There's the Disability Equality Index, which goes and rates companies based on their inclusion efforts and comes up with a benchmark score of 0 to 100. And in the 2023 report, there were 279 companies with a score of 100. These ones were included. So if you want to look up what they were doing, that's pretty cool. So why I'm here to talk about this all is, okay, we learned about what neurodiversity is, the challenges that neurodivergent people face, the strengths that they bring to an organization, but how can we actually practically apply this information? So there's a thing what I call the disclosure dilemma. So for a lot of neurodivergent employees, there are a lot of benefits to actually disclosing your status or your diagnosis to your employer, because by not disclosing, you may miss out on support that you may need, which may lead to increased frustration. And if people don't know that you are neurodivergent, you may feel the need to mask if that's something that you do. And then from the employer perspective, a person who hasn't disclosed their diagnosis may appear as being less engaged and productive. But it's not as black and white as this suggests. It is a bit of a catch-22. A lot of the time, people actually don't want to disclose their diagnosis. I think I saw a statistic that about 57% of neurodivergent tech workers with a diagnosis have not disclosed it to their employer. Reasons vary, but most of them come down to they don't see the point. There's not going to be any benefit. They're not going to be treated any differently. Alternatively, they're worried about it actually negatively impacting their day-to-day life. They're worried about how it's going to be received. It may impact potential job opportunities or career advancement opportunities. So why it's important to think about this is we know that there is an advantage to employees disclosing their diagnosis, but we have to think about would they want to in the first place? And if not, why? So the important thing is to create an environment that you feel, or that they would feel is supportive and empathetic and understanding. Employees are more likely to disclose their status if they feel some type of personal connection to their manager. They're also more likely to disclose it to their co-workers, their pals in the kitchen, rather than their manager. So by proving that your organization will treat you fairly and do its best to be accommodating, this can lead to people being more comfortable with disclosing their diagnosis. It can also open up conversations about potential workplace adjustments. Now, this can sound scary to an organization because you don't know what that actually means. Are we going to have to spend all this money on making all these adjustments to the workplace? But research has shown that most adjustments are actually, I think it was about 60%, cost nothing or actually very cost effective. And this isn't specific to neurodiversity-related adjustments. This is general across-the-board disability adjustments and accommodations. So some examples, I'm going to be going into some very high-level examples of behavioral accommodations, physical accommodations, and process accommodations. Behavioral ones are probably the most difficult one because they require changes in human behavior. But the most important thing is asking questions. If someone discloses that they are neurodivergent, you can ask them, what do they need? Chances are they don't know. But at least showing them that you have an interest in their well-being is a great step in the right direction. I knew that when I was diagnosed as being autistic, I was like, okay, cool, now what? Like, I'd been seeing a psychologist for years and years and years, but I've been talking about my feelings, but I don't actually know what I need to, like, make my workplace easier. So while you won't be, an employer won't be able to answer those questions for you, they at least show that you care. So just some practical examples would be sending materials in advance. Like if you've got a meeting coming up, sending them the agenda or just some key points about what to expect in the meeting, who's going to be there. Another example would be clear and unambiguous instructions. Most importantly, that are consistent. So if someone is used to receiving their tasks in the form of a ticket, and then suddenly you give them a random verbal instruction, that can be very confusing. Then a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with change. So whether it be organizational change or personnel change or daily process change, offering that extra support or making it known that you will offer that extra support with change can help people adjust when they're having a difficult time. And then lastly, something that we should all be doing anyway is checking for clarity and understanding when we're communicating a message to someone, making sure it's understood as we intended it to be communicated. Then physical changes. So a lot of these come from the point I made earlier about sensory sensitivities. They are largely related to like an open plan office environment, but you can apply them to different office environments or your own work from home environment. But having a focus or a quiet room to limit distractions, if you need to take a break, it's a nice option. Then a point that I'm very passionate about is respecting the headphones. That is all. Thank you. Then offering noise-canceling headphones as an option for employees, because some people aren't really able to filter out the chatter that happens in and around you. Then changing the light bulbs to just having softer, warmer lighting than those bright white LEDs, which can kind of hurt one's eyes. This is not personal. Then adjustments to process. So these are very, very high level points because I know that every organization is very different. But what I can summarize what I'm going to say now is just to think about all the touch points that an organization has with current employees and future employees, and thinking with what I've discussed now or what you generally may know, how you may unknowingly be hurting neurodivergent candidates and employees. So the first and most obvious part of the process, I'd say, that is the recruitment process. In preparation for this, I read through a lot of case studies of neurodivergent candidates who had been rejected from job interviews, where the reason for their rejection was related to their neurodivergent symptoms. So examples were an autistic person interviewed for a job, and they were rejected, and the interviewer said that they never made eye contact with any of the interviewers, so it made them seem untrustworthy. seems a bit unfair. Then another example was a person interviewing for a job. They were generally a little bit slower than average in mental processing, so they asked for clarification and repetition of the questions being asked. But the interviewer interpreted it as them not knowing what was being asked of them, which also isn't necessarily fair. Then basically what I'm saying is, you don't have to rethink your entire recruitment process, but just think about, am I unfairly judging this person? Because, I mean, I think we all do it unknowingly, even I do. I judge people for things that I do. Then rethinking performance metrics. That's actually on the point of performance reviews. So, like I said, this is very different for all companies because we don't know. I don't know what career advancement looks like in your organization, but there may be certain criteria required for advancing in one's career that may not really be suitable for neurodivergent candidates. So if we think back to the common challenges, a lot of them were actually related to interpersonal communication and having difficulties with interpersonal communication and it not being so intuitive. So having one of your required promotion metrics being client communication is can be a bit rough. And additionally, a common thing in companies, it'd be with developer roles at least, is when you're working up through the rungs of your career, it's generally expected that as you work your way up, you take on a more managerial role. And if interpersonal communication doesn't come naturally to you, this can be really stressful. And it may hurt your general outlook on where you're working. So not asking anyone to change anything, just think about it. Then last point is just on feedback systems. Very short one is just think when you're giving feedback to an employee, an easy one is just being like, would you prefer it to be written and then we can discuss it afterwards? Or would you like your manager to give it to you in private? We can discuss it with the general team later. The main point is just asking, how would you prefer to receive feedback? It's an easy one. Then last slide is just concluding that neurodivergence isn't like a sliding scale where someone is less or more neurodivergent, or it's more a spectrum. This is the easiest picture that I found that describes how it is. There's a saying in the autistic community that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. No two people are alike. I know I have friends who also have autism and ADHD, and we're not carbon copies of each other in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, that's the main thing. If anyone wants to talk to me about, I don't know, The Sims or neurodivergence, you can contact me on LinkedIn. I don't really use it a lot, but it's probably the easiest. And as tax to thank you for listening to me, those are my pets. That's my dog I bought socks for my baby and I put them on my dog. He fits size 0 to 3 month socks. But yeah, if you want to ask me questions, I'll do my best because it might just go. So, thank you.